that you need to have a minimum level of economic, I would say, activity and development to support the capital markets in its, I would say, developmental targets or improvements in this area. When we came to the exchange, the new board, and you're a member of the board, so basically it is part of the entire story that we're trying to create. We looked at capital markets from a value chain perspective. That is an important aspect that most people who didn't work in the venture capital field cannot capture, how capital markets are interrelated between the early financiers like the angel investors and venture capitalists and so on and so forth, and from the disclosure perspective, and from the language of the disclosure perspective, and from the communication perspective. And hence these are efforts that we have conducted to adjust the supply side. Hence you have a supply side intermediation and new products and so on and so forth, and then eventually you have the demand side and the improvement in this regard. Eventually capital markets, I agree, it's all about capital allocation and efficient capital allocation for resources. That's one. But the missing point that most people don't get, and it really is affecting at least emerging exchanges or emerging economy exchanges, that it is a monetary policy transmission mechanism, or let's put it in another way, it's an income redistribution. The only way for proper income redistribution or wealth redistribution is long-term investments through capital markets.
Interesting.
And hence, by, I would say, being oblivious at least towards the penetration of the financial services in the real economy and on the ground amongst other people, it doesn't have to be active managers, it can be passive investment vehicles that can be supportive for different players. This is a missed part that we need to regain, especially in countries like emerging ones, whereby the penetration of the pension system, which is acting on behalf of investors, is still very limited. So what is the difference between advanced economies and emerging economies in this area? In advanced economies, you have a very advanced pension system. Penetration of the pension premiums and insurance premiums as a percent of GDP is quite significant. In emerging economies, you don't have it. And who acts on behalf of individual and retail investors and long-term investors and young investors? And this is a point that we need to raise here, that in Egypt you have almost 2.5 million new baby on an annual basis. These would need to think about their prosperity from an income redistribution perspective going forward. So this is a very important aspect if we are aiming to have a proper penetration and a proper monetary policy transmission mechanism, whereby the interest rates changing has a real impact on consumption, has a real impact on capital formation by companies in this area. You need to increase the penetration of capital markets. This is the challenge.
So what's the EGX doing now in 1 year's time now as an aggressive plan to attract these?
Here it is twofold, honestly speaking. One would be, and that should be across all exchanges and all, honestly speaking, financial players, is better communication. I believe all the capital markets area have been wronged by, I would say, the movies that we get to see in international markets about how the capital markets function and so on and so forth. So better communication is an aggressive aspect that we're taking significantly during the coming period. The second aspect would be door-to-door knocking, honestly speaking, explaining explicitly what are the benefits of capital markets, how can you save incrementally through capital markets, and at the same time that's from the demand side. We're working on something that would be long-term, unfortunately, but someone has to start with it, that we're trying to embed with the Minister of Education, starting from grade 7 onwards, a special curriculum for how should any, I would say, youngster deal with his money in this area, because it cannot be the case that you have a graduate from grade 12 that knows some chemistry, biology, physics, and doesn't know anything about how to deal with his finances, how to deal with the banking sector, how to deal with the capital markets, and relating this to his age. But from the other hand, we're working significantly on increasing the supply, because this demand has to be met with a supply perspective at the end. So probably we're going to listen.
Let me take you from this.
From the private sector as well, but before you cut me here. From the private sector and the government sector.
Actually, one of the most liked questions on Slido I'm receiving is that will the focus be only on the government IPOs? So you answered the question already. No, he's talking also about not only the public, but also the private companies. But again, this is really taking us to like the hot topic in the capital market today, which are the announcement by the government for the 23 companies in the IPO program. And I'm so lucky that we arranged with Ashraf Ghazali to be with us maybe a couple of months before this announcement even. So Ashraf, as the CEO of NI Capital, which is by law, you are by law exclusively the investment bank of the government that is in charge of the IPO program, and then you will work with private investment banks and international, whether or local or whatever. But let me tell you that I think that the first sparkle was on the 1st of November 2016 with the investment council by the president himself. They announced that we will go private, we will go public with some companies. But for almost maybe 16, 17 months, there was no real action at all. But nowadays, 1 month ago, I think there is a big announcement, 23 companies coming to the market, representing several sectors. So they represent the real economic activity. It's a very ambitious plan. Everybody was happy with it. But to be honest with you, people are still maybe worried about the action plan, the time plan, the proceeds, where are they going? So if you can just give us some light on this, but real things, not real time plan. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the tough question. I mean, I think I'll answer your question in two parts. One has to do, why did it take that long for almost a year plus? And second, and most importantly, from a sovereign point of view or from a state point of view, what's the objective of the government to enrich or create much more depth to the capital market in light of development of capital markets and how it's helping development of the economy? The first question, with regard to why does it take that long, keep in mind that, and I'll be very frank about this, because everybody knows it quite well, the last privatization program that took place back in the 90s had some drawback. So the government have been taking very well-articulated steps of how it's going to go about this program going forward. Yeah. And that requires some of the legislative changes, some of the hurdles, some of the psychological barriers as well for state-owned companies to even consider additional listing or additional, or even consider the stock market. Yeah. And so this has been taking a lot of time. And I think this is a question, maybe in the most recent announcement, the government have finally put together an IPO Ministerial Economic Committee to mainly tackle all of the issues that were actually hindering the program to move forward. And I'm quite optimistic with the current leadership of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Investment, Planning and Petroleum as the main body for this economy. So this is as far as just put aside some of the logistics, some of the issues that were handling the program to move forward. Yeah. This is one thing. As far as the objective of the program, what is the objective of the program in a nutshell? One, I'll go back in 2008, you have a market cap to GDP roughly of over 100%. Right now, we have a market cap of GDP roughly around 17%, 18%, more or less in this range. And that's a major barrier for accessibility of inflow to access local currency and inflow to also FX. Most importantly, growth of the capital markets and trading volume by history has shown a great correlation between growth of trading activities and growth of GDP as well. And so the government have taken a clear steps that said the objective was to enrich the market, increase the depth of the market through much larger capitalization of state-owned companies. Yeah. And that NI Capital was appointed, and we have assessed roughly about 600 companies that's owned by the government, out of which we have put down a criteria to fulfill that objective, was which companies have quality of earnings, quality of management, clear backlog, and literally companies that have quality of earnings that such international or institutional investors would consider for Egypt. Yeah. And that has been shortened down to the most recent announcement by the minister or by the government with the 23 companies in. So that will help on creating depth to the market. Also, additional inclusion of new sectors to the markets, or a sector, Egypt, with a country that has a lot of logistics, for example, cannot only present by one or two companies in. You need much more depth into this sector, as well petrochemical, which is underrepresented in the market as well, by all means. Yeah. So these are the objective, and that's what we're currently working on. Going forward, after the most recent announcements, we believe that the 23 companies that were announced, and I'm sure everybody knows them, are broken down into two folds. One, these are existing listed companies. However, they have a shortfall of liquidity whereby you find 4, 5% or 10% here and there. A much larger growth will be floated to the market through public offerings, as well as secondary offering as well to private investors as well. So, and this will be all through the capital market. The government have played down two key issues. One, no strategic sale at this point. Because we're only floating additional percentage of the successful companies yet, which will help to achieve that objective. The second fold is new companies to the market. And I can tell you, without mentioning names, we are currently working with holding companies and subsidiaries on, I believe, some of the largest ever IPOs that will be coming to the market over the next 2 to 3 years. In new sectors altogether. 2
to 3 years. What's coming in the coming?
In the coming year, in 2018, yes. Roughly some of the existing listed companies will have an additional.
It's easier.
I'm sorry.
It's easier to.
It's easier, faster
yes.
as well. And from 1 to 2 companies, initiation of new IPOs.
So we are expecting. So we're expecting to start with the already existing listed names.
Yes.
And then we can see 1 or 2 of the newly listed.
Of course, and of course you follow the market demands and supply at that time as well.
But I believe like the 23 companies, they have to be floated within 2 years or 3 years.
3 years.
3 years time plan.
It all depends on the market, how the market can observe. And but all I can tell you that the mandate that the Ministry of or the Ministerial Committee have put together, that this program will be achieved within the next 3 to 5 years.
So we can expect 7 to 8 companies if we just divide it by 3 years, but definitely it will start slower and then it can.
You have 9
as long as we're
prototype.
You have 9 already listed out of the 20.
No, I mean overall. Yes. I mean from 7 to 8 between the existing and the new. Okay. I think this is very useful, and I think we're getting it, but I'm sorry, but I have to stop my colleagues here because actually we're receiving a lot of questions on Slido, so let me stop for 1 minute here. And I think, Mohammed, there are a lot of questions that are directed to you. Please tell the people just in 30 seconds, the financial products you are going to I don't know, to introduce to the market in 2018?
Well, it's not a secret, basically. I mean, we have worked on all the technological requirements when it comes for short selling. We had some proposals when it comes to introducing market-making activity for the entire capital markets, not only for a specific segment or as it is currently being implemented on the exchange-traded funds only. So we're putting up some amendments, some proposed, I would say, regulations from our side on for activating the market-making activity for the entire sector, with the specific requirements depending on the liquidity of the underlying asset and the segment that they are operating in. We had some proposals that would be related to expanding some of the specialized, what we call here in Egypt, specialized activity, the same-day trading, the margin trading, and so on and so forth. And then we have, but probably not in 2018, would be definitely working on financial derivatives or the derivatives market. This is one of the areas that we will introduce, inshallah.
Yani, your plan is like 1 year time, 2 year time?
I mean, let's when we have
I
concrete
know we
steps,
start with the short selling.
when we have concrete steps, I'm going, definitely to announce the time frame that we're going to introduce. But again, financial derivatives is one of the most important, I would say, financial instruments for these gentlemen to hedge the risks in the market.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. George, I think some people are interested also in the African market. And since we're sitting here, Egypt, on the north of Africa, so people are asking, what are the inherent advantages for capital markets in Africa? And what do you think need to be done in the African capital market to accelerate the economic growth in Africa in general?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm very bullish on both from my company perspective and from an individual perspective in terms of investing in Africa, and what I've heard for the last 2 days about investing in Egypt. I think things are very attractive. I think there are a number of compelling arguments to invest in the region. One is the growth. I mean, global growth is at about 2%. Africa is about 5 to 7%, and Egypt falls within that. So I think that's very attractive. I think what we talked about, I think Ashraf talked about, a little bit about this measure of stock market capitalization to GDP, also known as the Buffett indicator. The average in the world is 50%. Here it's around 20%. So there's an opportunity here, and I know Mohammed's doing everything he can to bring that up. But I think that from an external investor standpoint, there's a real opportunity there to build the capital markets. I think second of all is the young population. And Mohammed talked about financial literacy. I think that's so important. 40% of the population is under 18 here in Egypt. I think educating the younger population, financial literacy is important. I also think with my CFA hat that the education
you should use the CFA curriculum
higher, exactly.
In schools.
Many resources that can be used on the financial literacy angle, but at a more advanced level, the CFA curriculum for practitioners and professionals, certainly to develop the markets. And then I think the final thing is, the commodities in terms of the raw production and moving and diversifying the economies here in Africa, here in Egypt, from just sole exporting to production facilities and ancillary type industries.
Let me just try to get a quick answer on this. I think don't you see like the African markets need some sort of consolidation, because there are smaller countries in Africa, so like one exchange for like 3-4 countries much easier
Well, the one thing I would say from an external standpoint is I would like to invest, but sometimes it's difficult because of the liquidity or some of the things. You talked about ETFs. I mean, one of the ETFs that I looked at was in the bond markets, a global bond market ETF out of a company out of Mauritius, MCB, a Pan-African bond fund. That's an instrument that I can invest in 10 African countries, including Egypt, mostly government debt, but also some corporate debt, gives access. And that allows, that's a mechanism for a foreign investor to get involved in the African markets.
Interesting, I think. Fadi, I have to move fast, but real people, it seems you're famous here in Egypt, okay? Because people are asking how do you perceive as an international investor, as an asset manager, what do you like to see happening in Egypt capital market to increase the allocation to Egypt?
Well, as investors, we're very much bottom-up driven. So what dictates whether we invest in Egypt or any other country or any other specific company is usually the valuation we're paying to own part of this business.